And that's for everyone here too. Great. You guys are going to love my... Good evening, everyone. Going to ask everyone in the Zoom room to please mute yourself at this time. Thank you. And we're going to begin on page 39A. So please rise as we turn to page 39A. Barechu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. You may be seated. Baruch Adonai Melech Uma'avir yom u'mevi layla mavdil ben yom u'vein layla Adonai tzavot shemo El Chai v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Hamariv Aravim Avat olam be'Yisrael Havta Torah mitzvot. Ki hem chayenu ve'orech yameinu vahem nege yomam v'layla v'avatecha al tasir mimenu le'olamim Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, v'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol meodecha, Ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom alevavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha Uvelechtecha vaderech, uveshoch becha, uvekumecha, ukshartam leod al yadecha, vehayu letotafot beinenecha, uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha, uvisharecha, ve'ayam shemot yishmot. Leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'hitem keroshim lelohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim lihiot lachem lelohim Ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem emet, ve'emunah kol zmanim. Top of page 44. Umalchuto baratzon kiblu aleihem Moshe uMiriam uvnei Yisrael lechanu shira b'simcha rabba ve'amru chulam mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh nora tehilot osei feleh Malchut charovanecha bokeh yam livnei Moshe ze'eli anu ve'yameru Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed v'ne'emar kifada Adonai et Yaakov Uge'alo miyad chazak mimenu Baruch ata Adonai Gal Yisrael. Top of page 45. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom. Amideinu. Ushmor tzeitenu uvoenu l'chaim u'shalom me'ata ve'ad olam ufaros aleinu sukat shalomecha Baruch ata Adonai Haporei sukat shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'al Yerushalayim. We rise before the Hatzi Kadesh. Vayedaber Moshe moedei Adonai el bnei Yisrael. Yitkadal v'yitkada shemei Rabbah ve'alema divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon uvyomechon uchayei dechol beit Yisrael v'agalav yizman karib v'imru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam olam me'almayit Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudeshan B'richu le'ela mikol birchata v'shirata Tushbachata v'nechemata damiran be'alema v'imeru. Amen. The silent festival Amidah is found on page 306. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Le'olam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Le'olam. Ki atahu melech adon lecho hashalom. Ki atahu melech adon lecho hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Le'olam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Le'olam. V'tov be'enecha levarech et Amcha Yisrael b'chol עת ובכל שעה v'shlomecha. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Le'olam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Le'olam. Tasim Le'olam. Tasim Le'olam. We turn to page 54, Kaddish Shalem. Yitgadal v'yikdash shemei Rabbah v'yamad divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yamachon v'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael v'agalau v'zman kari v'yimeru. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam lo me'amayayid. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudesha b'richu leila mikorta v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alama v'yimeru. Titkabal sloton devatahon decho Yisrael kodama v'hon devishmaya v'yimeru. Yehei shlama rabba min shmaya v'chayim aleinu ve'el kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru. Amen. We rise, page 79, for the festival Kiddush.
Sabri chaverai, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei peri agafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher bachar banu mikol ha'am, v'romamanu mikol hashon, v'kiddishanu b'mitzvotav, v'titen lanu Adonai b'ahava, moadim l'simcha, chagim uzmanim l'sason. Et yom chag ha-Shavuot hazeh, zaman matan torateinu mikra kodesh, zecher letziat Mitzrayim, ki vanu v'charta, v'yotanu kidashta mikol ha'amim, umoadei kodshecha, besimcha uvsason inchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehecheyanu, v'kiyamanu, v'higianu, lazman hazeh. L'chaim.
Remain standing, page 56. Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו פגועי ארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. שנו שמיים. הכתוב בתורתך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו I invite those of you who have a need or desire to say Kaddish to please remain standing at this time. If you're saying Kaddish, we'll quickly go around the room so you can say who you're saying Kaddish for. Okay, and we have a few other people in the Zoom room who I know are saying Kaddish, and so we're not going to do the Hebrew names, but if you want to say their name very quickly, and then we'll come together for Kaddish. Flora? Just the English, the name right now. Anybody else? Okay. Mourner's Kaddish, page 58. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divrach hirute v'yamlich malchute. B'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uv'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam alomei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yithalal, shemei dekudesha, brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. B'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. And I also just want to mention that Karen was saying Kaddish for her father. Yigdal. We're going to turn to page 62.
There we go. Please join me. Yigdal Elohim Chai ve'yishtabach nimtzayim te'et el mitziuto echad v'yein yachid ke'ichudo ne'lam v'gam ein sof le'achduto ein lo demut haguf ve'ein oguf lo na'aroch elav kedushato kadmon l'chol davar asher nivra rishon v'ein reshit l'reshito hino adon olam v'chol notzar yoreh gedulato u'malchuto shefa nevuato netano el anshe segulato v'tifarto lo kam b'Yisrael kemo sheol navi u'mabit et emunato torat emet natan le'amoel al yad nevio neman beito לא יחליף האל ולא ימיר דתו, לעולמים לזולתו. צופה ויודע סתרנו, מביט בסוף דבר בקדמתו. גומל לאיש חסד כמפעלו, נותן לרשע רק כרישתו. ישלח לקיצה ימין משיחנו, לבדוק מחקקי ישועתו. מתים יחייל ברוך חסדו, ברוך עדי עד שם תהילתו. מתים יחייל ברוך חסדו, ברוך עדי עד שם תהילתו.
Chag Sameach, everyone. Chag Sameach. We'll see all of you on Zoom tomorrow, 7:15.
Yasher Koach Chazan Mimi, Chag Sameach. Chag Sameach. Thank
Chag
you.
Sameach, Chag Sameach.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Tonight, we're not going to stay up all night long. We're going to stay up until hopefully about midnight, which is way past my bedtime. But we're going to do our best so we don't miss the receiving of the Torah. That's what staying up all night, the Kabbalists wanted to recreate so they didn't miss the receiving of the Torah right at the break of dawn. Well, we're not going to fully recreate that. We'll do our best. And tonight, I want to invite all of us to be vulnerable, to jump into that which you are uncomfortable with, to challenge yourself, to have deep and meaningful conversations. Okay, can we all agree on that? Thank you. That's why you came. I'm glad to hear that. So tonight, we titled it, Embracing the Wilderness, a Shavuot Journey. And if we think about what was going on, thousands of years ago when the Israelites were about to receive the Torah, they were about to experience the most monumental change I think Earth ever experienced or humankind ever experienced, the revelation at Mount Sinai. Now, some of those Israelites did not take that change well, right? What happened? The golden calf, right? They complained, some of them died. It was not an easy moment for them. And then they wandered for 40 years, experiencing more hardships and more challenges and more change. And it didn't stop there. It kept going when they got to the land of Israel and kept experiencing change and wanted to fight against it, to push against something that was unknown, the fear of change. There are 6 stages of change, according to this one graphic that I found that we're going to follow this evening. So what happens is there's a change that occurs. So tonight that change was the revelation at Mount Sinai. Big deal. Huge deal. The stage 1 is loss. Right? They lost all that they knew before, the life that they knew in Egypt. They had feelings of fear. They didn't know what to expect with this relationship with God. They were absolutely terrified. They didn't even want to hear God's voice. Stage 2 comes doubt. They're skeptical of this new change. Right? They build a golden calf. They longed for the days when they were in Egypt and they had the cucumbers and the fish, that's what they wanted. Then comes stage 3 with discomfort. They have a little bit of anxiety, but they're starting to get used to this new change. This is when they're kind of on their journey towards the land of Israel. And then we hit that danger zone where you can give up, they could return to Egypt, or they can push forward. We get to stage 4, discovery. Their feelings of anticipation. They're getting a little bit excited. Thoughts are creative, right? They're building the Mishkan. They're learning. They're forming community. Just on Shabbos, we read Bamidbar, where they're really forming the camps, and they're being counted. They're building a community. They're ready for this adventure. Stage 5, understanding. Feelings of confidence. They're now really ready to go into the land of Israel. They know what it's all about. They're ready to build this relationship with God and be a whole community. Stage 6 is integration, putting it all together, feelings of satisfaction. We made it. They made it to the other side of the Jordan River. Their thoughts are focused. Or just before they get too comfortable, another change happens. Right? They cross into the land of Israel, and they go through these 6 stages once again. This evening, we're going to hit on all 6 of these stages a little bit later this evening through the lens of different styles of our tradition. So I'm going to go through those a little bit later, but we're going to begin with a teaching from my very first Bible teacher. It was almost 7 years ago, which is unbelievable. But I look in the mirror and I say, yeah, it has been 7 years, I guess. And Gary Shapiro, who taught me at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies back in 2017, he is a master educator. He taught me to look at the Bible critically. He taught me a love of biblical grammar. And I still take all of those lessons, and I still have all the notes from class from 7 years ago. My wife wants me to get rid of them, but I still have all of them at my house. And I'm so grateful that Gary agreed to teach this evening. So you should have a source sheet. I want to give a quick introduction. So it's the book of Genesis and God's personal growth. So it wasn't just the Israelites who had to grow in their lives. It was also God who had to evolve and change in the book of Genesis. So human life, of course, involves change, crisis, loss, or disruption, and our efforts to cope with them. But in the Torah, especially in the first chapters of Genesis, even God is portrayed as going through significant stages of change, loss, and growth. What can we learn about facing our own challenging times from how the Creator of the universe deals with the difficulties of guiding human beings? We're going to have Gary Shapiro is going to guide us through the early chapters of Genesis, learning about God and God's change.
All right. Well, if I succeeded in giving you even a bit of a love of Hebrew grammar, I think that's a pretty good accomplishment. I'm going to do something right now that I hate when people do to me when I am a member of the audience, but I'm just going to put it out there. It's optional. If anybody wants to move closer, because we have a lot of seats up here, we can make it feel a little more intimate, a little more together. You see that I requested teaching down here on the floor because up there is way too scary and distant from the group that we have here. So if you do want to move down, I don't blame you if you don't, because I usually don't. But if you want to, please do. Welcome to Shavuot, everybody. Chag Sameach. This is the holiday of Torah, of course. We're celebrating Torah. Torah, which is the center of Jewish life, Jewish existence, our relationship with God, our relationship with each other. We are going to talk about some journeys of change tonight, as you heard from Rabbi David. And in my opinion, I'm going to come down on the side of saying that there isn't one model of how people change or where change comes about or what the labels of the different stages of change should be called. You heard one model just now. It is certainly possible. It's certainly one working model. I think there are many ways to conceptualize change and growth and development. You'll see when we get to the material that the labels that I gave to some of the growth and change and development that God goes through is a little different, some different words, some different labels, but I think everything that Rabbi David spoke about is in the packet that I put together tonight. So we're going to explore in a bit some change and growth that God goes through. God, I'm going to argue tonight, is our first model of how we grow and change and develop, right alongside the growth and development of human beings. So we're going to use God as a model. We're going to take God as a model. And it's at this first juncture that I just have to say a quick word about theology and the subject of anthropomorphism, because we're going to be talking about God. And the Torah, especially in the first chapters of Genesis, kind of portray God at times in a pretty human way. If you're not that familiar with this, you will be hopefully after tonight. And if you do know what I'm talking about, it raises a lot of questions about, wait, is this God? Does God have vulnerabilities? Does God have faults or make mistakes or not know certain things or have to learn things along the way? It's kind of strange when you think about the notion of a God as the perfect being, as the absolute being, which is how Judaism and other monotheistic religions kind of think about God at the end of the day. So what are we supposed to do with that? So I'm just going to this is a subject for a whole nother teaching, but I'm just going to put out there briefly a couple of ideas about this. I'm pretty traditional in my own personal beliefs and Jewish theology. But being traditional or being committed to the Torah text, in my view, doesn't mean that we have to take the Torah simplistically or too literally. In my view, not everything in the Torah is meant to be taken literally. Something can be profoundly true, real and true, and not be necessarily, depending on what we're talking about, a historical event. There isn't always a one-to-one correspondence between truth and history. And I think that's especially important in the beginning chapters of Genesis. In my view, the beginning chapters of Genesis are true. They're God's revelation to us. That doesn't mean they're all literal. And then when it comes to God, what this implies is, for example, two ideas. God could be described in a certain way, even though it may not be literally true about God, in order for God and the text to teach us examples for our sake, for human sake. This is an approach that Midrash uses and Rashi uses in the wake of Midrash. The idea that God did something, not because God needs to do it, but because we need to learn it. God sometimes says, hey, we're going to see it tonight. Let's go down, let me go down, or even let us go down and see what's happening there on earth. Does God have to go down? Does God have to consult with others? So a Midrashic approach is no. God is doing that to teach us that we have to examine things very closely and go down and look and consult with others when we're making big decisions. So this is one model for how to understand some of the sources we're going to see tonight. God setting an example. The other, which is a little more complex, and maybe we could talk about another time, God enters into the human sphere, the finite cosmic sphere, when God creates the universe. So, in a sense, when God does that, God opens God's self up to human kinds of experiences, including a certain kind of vulnerability. If God's going to operate in this universe and not in the perfect God way, then God, in a certain way, has to take on imperfection. Not because God really has to in God's own true self, but because God's entering into relationship with human beings. And if God is not going to make us into puppets or robots, then we might do things that set God back, that challenge God. We'll see about that tonight. So just for the more philosophical and theological thinkers among you, this is part of where I'm coming from in my approach to some of these texts. So we're going to learn tonight attempt to learn what God goes through in the first chapter of Genesis. Does everyone have a packet? Okay, take out your packet or turn to your packet. We're going to go through these sources. If you glance through, you'll see there's a lot of sources. I'm going to try to move through these pretty quickly. There was a very scary word, another scary thing, a scary word in the program for tonight. It's the dreaded, for some of us teachers, it's the dreaded L word. Lecture. The talk I was going to give tonight was described as a lecture. Well, I'm probably going to end up, I've already done more lecturing in the last 10 minutes than I normally do in any class that I teach. And in the interest of time, because time is limited, I will have to move through some material. But don't be afraid to raise your hand, to ask questions. I really encourage that. I really like that. So I will try to also leave time at the end for questions, but don't be afraid to raise your hand. I might have to put it off or say, give a limited answer, but I do want it to be interactive tonight. Yes, already. Yeah. Yeah, just from what I was saying before and from my vantage point, I'm saying God created imperfection. Absolutely. I think we have to come to that conclusion, and we're going to see it tonight in the sources. So it's a good lead-up question to what we're going to do tonight. Okay, are we ready? Chapter 1 of Genesis. Who knows? Well, I'll start off the questioning. Who knows what the most common refrain seems to be in the first chapter of Genesis? What word or phrase appears over and over again in that chapter? Yes. God saw that it was good. Were you going to say the same thing, more or less? Also the days, but each day is different, right? First, second, third, or 1, second, third. But I'm focusing right now on the word good. When you read through the first chapter of Genesis, as we say nowadays, it's all good. It is literally all good. Well, actually, when you get to the end, it's very good. It's even better than good. It's very good. I think when you talk about a journey of change, you have to start from the good place, from the equilibrium, from the status quo where things are going right. And then some of the challenges can come up and come in. But we're looking at the first chapter of Genesis. I'll just read a little bit from the beginning here. And God created the human in his image. He created him in the image of God. Male and female, he created them. Very familiar to us. This should be a good thing. God is perfect or absolute or great or other adjectives that we could use. So we're going to have to be pretty good, presumably. What could be wrong with us? If you go to the end of that section, verse 31. Wow, I can't believe I'm skipping things. I'm actually skipping things. And God saw all that he had made, how it was very good. Folks, how could anything go wrong after a beginning like this? I mean, seriously. Something does go wrong. Something goes off course. We know this. We'll see this tonight. But it's hard to understand how it's even possible. Everything was very good. It has the stamp of approval from the creator of the universe. And of course, in a way, it gets even better than that. I didn't include this on the sheet, but Shabbat comes after this. Maybe there's a word that even, a phrase that even surpasses very good, which could be, or a couple of words. I'm thinking of the word kadosh, vayikadesh. God sanctified the Sabbath day. Shabbat was made holy. So you do get this image of perfection in the first chapter of Genesis, which really makes you wonder what's going to come next. Since we do know what comes next, how can that possibly be? So we've got this position of goodness, of stability. Moving on to chapter 2. Now, chapter 2 is also a creation story, of course. But it's a different creation story, or a different version of the creation story, or a close-up of the creation story. There are many different ways to think about this and frame this. If you haven't thought about the differences between chapter 1 and chapter 2, you'll see it a little bit tonight. What is missing from chapter 1? We already kind of said it, but now we're talking about the mirror image of it. What's missing? We have good in chapter 1. There's nothing bad. There's nothing evil. But this enters with chapter 2. Same creation, different realities. Verse 17. God is speaking to the humans, telling them about this tree, the tree in the garden. But from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat. Wait a second. What bad? Why is there bad? Why should there even be bad? Everything was declared to be good. God says there's a tree, and the word bad, sometimes translated as evil, but I'm going to reserve that for a different Hebrew word. The word bad comes up for the first time. So this already raises a question. You'll see, if you haven't noticed, that I put some key words of what I think is happening in God's journey, so to speak, in each one of these sections. A problem arises. Or is it an opportunity? It certainly presents a risk, because what enters the scene, what terrible consequence enters the scene here? Death, the possibility of death. If you eat from this tree, you must die. Okay. But they don't have to eat from the tree. So maybe badness does not have to enter the world, even though it's a potentiality. And why the world has that potential is interesting. But notice that even in God's perfect world, some kind of profound wrongness is introduced into creation. A terrible risk comes into view. And then in verse 18, we get a very important thing, and this is concrete. This is not just potential. Verse 18, then Adonai God, the Lord God said, it is not good for the human to be alone. I will make a counterpart for him. It's so interesting to me. God is the creator of all this, and everything was labeled good, but God perceives for the first time the category not good. And it's an actual existing not good. The not goodness of aloneness. So God is introducing and recognizing the existence of negative challenges. This one's not going to be too hard to deal with. God is going to create a counterpart, but God perceives the not good. There's been a shift in God from the total absolute goodness of creation to the possibility and the distinction between good and bad, and the introduction of the experience of death, and on a much more, day-to-day level, relationship and how partnership is preferable. God sees a distinction between partnership and aloneness and assigns categories to each. Okay. But still things are holding their own. The human woman is created, and Adam's very happy about that. And they're going to cling to each other. So all seems well and good still, even though there are these rumblings, the possibility of not good, the possibility of bad, the possibility of death. Yes. It's interesting. I think we're supposed to assume that God made that tree. God made that garden, God made that tree. But the question you're asking is interesting, Ellen. It goes back to even to Genesis 1. Because if you read the first couple of verses closely, right, it kind of makes it sound like when the story's starting, the water's already there. And the darkness is already there. So did God create those or not? The Midrash is very aware of this and talks about those passages and finds other verses in the Torah that said, no, God, don't worry. God did create everything, yesh me'ayin, it's something from nothing. But it is a good question. I also want to know that about the snake. Did God make the snake to be bad? Okay. Let's look at the third section. Because now things really start to heat up for God. We come to what Jews sometimes call the first sin. Christians talk about the fall, but we really don't think in those terms. It is a crisis, though. And I think it's a crisis for human beings, the first sin, and the consequences of that, but it's also a crisis for God. Because as you know, they do eat from the tree. They eat from the tree. And they're aware of their nakedness now, and they hide. And we get in the Torah, right? Judaism is very famous as a religious tradition for asking questions. Well, where is the first question in Jewish tradition? It's here. It's in this next section that we're looking at, number 3, Genesis 3. After they eat, God comes to the garden and asks questions. One sec, I'll come right to you. Where are you? It's the first question to humans, and it's one word. It's very sublime. Ayeka. God's first question to human beings, as some of the Hasidim taught, it's a question that echoes through all time, all centuries, all history. God asking the human being, where are you? Where are you at? But God asks other questions. Who told you that you are naked? What have you done? Now, when we're younger, sometimes we look at God's questions in the Torah and we go, wait, does God not know the answers to these things? Does God not know where the human being is? Why the question? Isn't God omniscient? I do think God is omniscient, personally. But as I was saying earlier, God enters into the human situation and is asking questions. Questioning comes up. This is a stage of change. We already had risk in the second section. Concern for what could be, and now the first crisis sets in. How the human being could have sinned, given their pedigree, given their origin. I mean, the best manufacturer ever, if you read the label, made by God, and yet we're not perfect. God creates imperfection. God creates finite beings who can go wrong, beings who can choose. This was God's choice. But it results in a kind of a crisis for God. Now, there's an interesting question here, which I'm going to ask right after I take your question. So thank you. Thank you for that. I am arguing tonight that God does demonstrate a kind of a learning curve. My introduction was meant to suggest that there are different ways to understand that. You could say God is modeling the human learning curve that we go through and teaching us something. That's one very more traditional way to take what I'm talking about tonight. you could take a slightly more radical approach, which is God enters into the situation so much that God also learns. Not that he did it in a sloppy way, but that there's an inevitable learning. Why? Because the human being is free. If God created a real free human being, a creation which is not completely under God's puppetry, God's control, then God is going to see, oh, look, this happens. Could God have known the future? Sure. But maybe God prevented himself from knowing the future, or herself from knowing the future. Or maybe God acted within the reality, even though God had access to the future. So there are different ways to think about it. But I am suggesting that God was on a learning curve. That's part of what I'm arguing for tonight. Okay. Yes. 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 You could take, absolutely. And I don't take this question, where are you, as if he's trying to find them literally. Yes, sorry, thank you. Zina's asking about whether this could be, it's the notion or the idea of responsibility. These questions are imposing responsibility on human beings. Absolutely. That is not different than or in contradiction with what I'm saying either. Here's one question before I move on. How should we voice or act out, or if you were the director of the movie, how should we direct God's questions? These questions here. Where are you? Who told you that you are naked? What have you done? But there's many tones of voice that you could use. Is God angry? Is God curious? Is God just asking for information? Do you see what I'm getting at? Because the issue of anger goes to the issue of change. Is God getting frustrated? Is God finding this problematic? There's some kind of crisis here. I would argue there's some kind of setback for God. But what is God's emotional state? That's something for each person to consider and think about, and it flows right into section 4. As I was saying, God enters a condition of relinquishing control, which is something we experience as humans. When change happens, we experience our lack of control in some ways, sometimes more, sometimes less. If we could control everything, presumably there would be no vulnerability, there would be no surprises, but maybe that's not true, because God could have controlled everything, but God allowed for the possibility of what one of my teachers in grad school like to call the human adventure. It was a real adventure for God. There was unpredictability. And as such, God experiences, at least in the text, a certain kind of anxiety. We're in chapter 3, toward the end. Source number 4. And Adonai, God said, look, the human has become like one of us, knowing good and bad. Now he might reach out and take also from the tree of life and live forever. There are several problems with that verse. Yes, that is one of the classical problems. The question is, who's the us? We already had it. Let us make humans in our image. I guess I left it off the sheet. But it comes up like 3 times, I think, in Genesis. Who's the us? There are some classical answers. The angels. The earth. The earth itself. Ramban Nachmanides has a super interesting commentary on let us make the human being, that God is talking to the earth, because human beings are a combination of the spiritual and the material. So that's one question. But I'm particularly interested in God's fear, God's anxiety, God's worry. Well, he might do something bad. He might do something out of my control, something that I can't prevent him, don't want him. I mean, skeptics or non-believers, sometimes, I actually encountered this recently online. Look at this as God being very territorial. I better keep him from messing with my territory now. I don't read it that way, but we definitely have some uncertainty here on God's part. God could have just stopped him or whatever without even expressing this. So this is a moment in that journey of change, of going through, certainly with something which human beings go through, of being uncertain about the future, of worry about what's going to happen, anxiety about the future, and what the consequences could be. Somebody over here also had a question? Yes. Sure. Yeah. Another classic approach is to say, God's talking royally. The only big problem with that, or it's actually a problem with all of them, but including that is, why does God shift to the royal we in certain cases and not in other cases? But yes, that is another possible response. Okay. Yes, thank you. Okay. Was he anxious? Okay. Okay. Interesting. Going back to the last section. And what about this? What is your name? Leora. What about this verse that I just read where God says, now he might reach out and take from this tree and eat it and live forever. Is God worried? No? He sounds worried. Yes, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. But I'm just noting, she said it's God giving us, I've been saying this, the possibility of choosing, of living a real human life. But for some reason, God also expresses anxiety here, worry, or a kind of a fear. It is expressed. Maybe God's not actually feeling it, but it is expressed that way. And then God acts defensively, I'm going to call it, which is something we also do when change hits. God acts defensively in verse 24. He stationed the cherubim, the kruvim, and the blade, whatever this is, and the blade of the revolving sword to guard the way to the tree of life, because God doesn't want us to eat from the tree of life, at this point anyway. So God has to guard the tree. God goes into kind of a defensive mode of sorts. Now, guard can mean two things. Guard can mean two things. It can mean to close something down, to try to get more security. When you're insecure or when you're uncertain, one response in moments of change is to try to gain more certainty. But it also could be an act of preservation. There are commentators who see this as God is preserving the way to the tree of life. So there's some ambiguity there, but God is taking defensive steps against all of this change. Something has gone pretty wrong, but it's going to get a lot worse. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, but you are concerned, which is a brand of worry. Okay, yes, I am with you. And this is why I said at the beginning that I don't want people to be overly literal. And yet, I don't want to shy away too much from the way the text is presenting God as going through a set of challenges and changes. Things that you could have totally imagined would not have been part of this story if everything went exactly according to plan. I will come back to a couple of questions that I'm seeing. I just want to get a little bit further. It was painful, but I skipped the Cain and Abel story. That is, I did leave one thing out, maybe two, from my original plan, because in the interest of time, which I was rapidly drawing short anyway, Cain and Abel is a very important story in this vein. I mean, think about it. The first brother kills the second brother. Human beings are killing each other. This product that God has made, this human, what's wrong with him? What's wrong with this? God is facing these great challenges, and it continues in chapter 6. Cain and Abel is almost a foreshadowing of humanity doing violence to each other. And then there's this very mysterious part, if you see at the beginning of section 5, Genesis 6, this interbreeding of some kind between some kind of great or divine beings and human women. Very strange what's going on there. It needs its own session. And notice God makes a choice. God makes a revision. Who remembers? Chapter 5, the chapter that precedes this. How long were people living in the pre-Diluvian, before the hundreds and hundreds of years? Methuselah, 969 years, the longest lived man in the Bible. 969, almost 1,000 years. Here, God makes a decision in verse 3, my spirit will not dwell in humans forever, given that they are flesh. Their lifespan will be 120 years. Which is more or less, right? That's kind of what it is, even to this day, even with all our medicine. There are, the longest lived people, you hear 120, 121, 124, I've heard. But, it's right around there. But notice the recalculation. Couldn't God have designed that from the beginning? God is adapting. God is changing direction, seeing the results of the actual outcomes of the human adventure here. God decides to reduce the human lifespan to more or less the proportions that we see now. But if we turn the page, if you're patching it the same way I am, verse 5, we are leading up to the flood. And this is a super key verse. And those of you who don't want God to get too emotional, you're going to have to be challenged by these verses. Verse 5 in chapter 6. But Adonai saw, the Lord saw that human evil on earth was massive. And every intention of the plans of their hearts was thoroughly bad all the time. Adonai regretted that he had made humans on earth, and he was heartbroken. Very strong emotions that God is described as experiencing here. Human emotions. It's anthropomorphic. As I said, there are different ways to approach this theologically. The Torah isn't afraid of assigning emotional responses to the human being. But they're hard emotions. Emotions that we go through when difficult challenges come upon us. I mean, think about it. God has regret. It's fascinating that the Bible is not afraid of describing God having regret. Well, if God can have regrets, certainly we can have regrets. Did God fail? Did God fail with humanity? God almost fails in God's own evaluation, right? Next verse. I will wipe the human beings whom I created off the face of the earth, for I regret that I had made them. Talk about change. And I want to remind people, we are still in the first Torah portion. This is the very end of the first Parsha, Parshat Bereshit. But Noah found favor with Adonai is the last verse of Parshat Bereshit. Think about it. Talk about an arc, a narrative arc. Everything's good. Everything's very good. And now God is going to wipe out everything. Fortunately, there still is hope. It feels like there's a lot of failure in here. It's not complete failure. Noah found favor with God. But there's some lessons here in facing and dealing with human failure, human disappointment, human regret. You're in good company if you have felt these emotions, because God has felt them, according to the way the Torah presents things. God experienced it and dealt with it. God found hope and the good that remained. Noah and creatures. God had Noah, as you know, collect 2 of every creature, bring it on the ark. The ark is that symbol of sustained, ongoing hope, which carries into the next passage. I just have to point out one thing. That I might not finish with everything, but we must see something that comes up in this next passage, because after the flood, we're now in section 6, which is Genesis 8. There's hope, and it's represented by sacrifice, and it's represented by scent, beautiful scent. This, when I read this, it gives me more motivation to do a nice Havdalah. Noah made sacrifices. In verse 21, it says, Adonai smelled the fragrant scent, and Adonai said to himself, never again will I curse the ground because of humans. Since the intention of the human heart is bad from their youth. Does that last verse sound familiar? It should. If you look back to the previous section, verse 5, God said, every intention of the plans of their hearts was thoroughly bad all the time. And now God says, the intention of the human heart is bad from their youth. Which one of those is worse? More intense. The first one. God's moderated it a little bit. But what's important here is this very similar idea, which was the basis for destroying human beings before the flood, is now the basis for never again destroying the human beings. Look what it says here. I won't destroy them because they're so bad. I can't expect, my expectations were off. Another part of adjusting to change. I have to change my standards sometimes, my expectations sometimes, and attitudes sometimes. Sometimes we can't compromise on certain things, but certain things we might need to adapt and change and compromise.
Fascinating that God says the same thing in the beginning before the flood, destroys the world, says the same thing almost after the flood. You'd think God would say what he said, knowing that destroying the world isn't going to change anything. It's like sometimes when we do something that we know isn't going to make a difference, we do it anyways, and then we're like, why did we do it? It didn't make any difference. So you wonder, why would God destroy the world if God in the end is going to be in the same place that God was before God?
So I'm arguing tonight, I'm suggesting that God allows God's self to go through this process. Or God's modeling the process for us in order for us to learn that maybe that extreme reaction of wanting that impulse to want to destroy everything and start over, maybe that's not a healthy impulse. Maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe it was necessary. But it's something to think about because God does say something very similar that was the basis for destroying them, that now is the basis for never again destroying them. Some kind of learning has taken place here. I think it's fair to argue. Yes. So there is a compromise here. I agree with you. And just to very quickly go on to the next source, we see that God starts again. God starts again with a new kind of covenant. We know about Noah's covenant. We're in section 7, Genesis 9. And God gives them permission to eat again. Oh, I have to take a question over here. Yes. Yes, exactly. This is another beautiful way to restate what I was saying at the beginning. We are in the image of God. So how is it even possible that we did bad? Why is this part of us? I mean, at the risk of frustrating people, because I'm going to say something that requires an hour of explanation, my personal philosophy is God intended for us to eat from the tree, and that it was part of the plan. The struggle between good and bad in humans was meant to be there. But the way the Torah on the simplest level presents things, just because we're in the image of God, by the way, it's really, really interesting. It's been noted that after God creates the human being, God doesn't say, and it was good. God doesn't look at it and say it was good. It's only at the end of day 6, God saw everything that it was very good. But human beings are not said to be specifically good. Maybe being in the image of God means to have the potential to do bad. Okay, here first. No, it implies that God wanted there to be free will and wanted us to have that choice of eating from the tree. I'm saying that God created the situation where free will would happen, and God didn't want us to be children forever, but maybe we could have chosen not to eat from the tree. I'm not saying that is impossible, just very unlikely. And God created the circumstances for it to happen. I'm getting more questions, and I know we're running. We're okay? Okay, yes. Yep. True. So what does Tselem Elohim mean? How are we B'Tselem Elohim? Physically. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Clearly, we're not God. Yes. It doesn't mean that we're God. I think that's absolutely right. I'm just going to try to take people first who haven't asked a question yet. Did you ask one before? Go ahead. Yeah. So is it physical? It's appearance. Most people nowadays anyway, or for the last, since Maimonides for sure, don't want to say that our image is because we look like God. God looks like us and we look like God physically, but Rashi kind of seems to go in that direction, so who knows? It's possible. Nice. Zach. Yeah.
Or God over God, like, what is this? The physical and heaven merging. You're not, you don't have full control. One doesn't have full control. You have something incredibly evil, like killing your brother, good, like building the ark and all that.
Saving humanity. Yeah.
So maybe it's a little, it's a very large struggle that goes through.
And what do the rabbis, how do the rabbis label that struggle? Quiz, pop quiz? It's a little vague. I heard it. Yetzer hara and Yetzer hatov. There are two drives. There are two fundamental drives. The word for intention in this English translation is Yetzer. That's where the word Yetzer comes from. But it is a creative struggle between those two parts of a human being. Yes, absolutely. Yes. I made it. We do it all the time for the Toledo High School. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, with help from Safari, of course, to put it on this page. Okay, so just another minute, we'll wrap up here. I want to say God started again, which is another key moment of responding to change, the strength to start again. What did it take to start over? Maybe it would have been very tempting to God to wipe the slate completely clean and really start over, or maybe not start again. Was God tempted to do away with the whole thing? Hard to say. But God does endure with the hope that remains and starts over again. And notice, for example, in chapter 9 here, verse 6, it's repeated what we had in the first chapter. In the image of God, he made humans, but it comes in a different context. God has adapted or adjusted God's practice. At the beginning, it was just a blessing that we received, and we were in the image of God, but there was no structure or focus of responsibility or law. Now those things are introduced. The laws against homicide, the declaration that God will hold people responsible for their actions. Here, the image of God is linked with capital punishment. One who spills the blood of humans, by humans their blood will be spilled. So it's not just that we're in the image of God, that comes with a consequence, a structure. God adjusted God's attitude, I would suggest, and expectations in the previous passage. And here, God adapts God's practices and makes a covenant for the first time, which is a crucial structure in the Bible. This is where the rainbow comes in. It's not on the sheet. This is where the rainbow comes in as a symbol of hope. Finally, we're skipping, more skipping. The Tower of Babel story has some really interesting things. God kind of seems to get anxious again in a parallel way to the Garden of Eden. But this time, in the Tower of Babel, God doesn't destroy, God scatters. God takes a different solution, a more peaceful solution, a more pragmatic, perhaps, solution. Finally, and you can really make this case, that all of Genesis 1 through 11 is God's personal journey of change, which leads up to Lech Lecha, to the story of Abraham. Other teachers before me have pointed out that Genesis 1 through 11 kind of provides the justification for why God chose Abraham, why the Jewish people, why Israel is here and necessary in the first place. But look at God's resilience. The last source, starting over with Abraham. In a new way, God renounced his original plans, her original plans, to handle the universe in a certain way. And now God is going to choose one family from all the families of the earth and do it differently. It's going to be quieter, maybe. It's going to be more subtle. It's going to be more long-term. But blessing flows out of this. Look at all the appearances of blessing. I will turn you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a source of blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through you. That goes back to Genesis 1. God blessed the first human beings, and now God is blessing Abraham. How much has God been through, has endured in Parshiot, Bereshit, and Noach, and now in Lech Lecha, God begins a new journey. The ability that God shows is very profound to start something different and new based on personal learning and experience, which is, I think, a powerful model for us to learn from as well. Chag Sameach, everybody.
No quiz. I want to give you kind of a brief overview of what's going to come next. But first, I want to thank Gary. That was a brilliant teaching. I have a lot to think about. I'm sure all of us do as well. Right now, I'm sure we're all a little hungry for some cheesecake. So we're going to have some cheesecake in the social hall. Don't get up quite yet. So there's cheesecake, there's fruit, there's lots of delicious dairy dessert. After that, there's going to be 2 different breakout sessions. We'll probably say 9:25, the first breakout session will start. And I want you to challenge yourself to go to a teacher that you might not have learned from, to learn a subject that you might not be familiar with. But I'm going to give you the topics and the teachers and the locations. Now I'll give you them again when we, after dessert. Okay, so block 1, about 9:25. Going to learn Torah with stage 1 on Lost. That's with Rabbi Vogel. That'll be right here in the sanctuary. Stage 2, Doubt, Tefillah with Rabbi Adam. That'll be in Hirsch Hall, or formerly Hirsch Hall. Musar with Rabbi Cameras on Discomfort will be in the chapel. And there's also going to be a teen session with Michelle. And that will be in the conference room. And that's going to be comparing modern Israeli pop songs post October 7th with some of our prophets from Tanakh. So if the adults want to go there too, they can go there as well. It sounds really fascinating. And then we'll have block 2, will probably be about 10:15 or so. It's past my bedtime too, but we'll stay. You know, we're supposed to stay up all night learning some Torah. It's good for you. You'll have good dreams if you stay up late. So there'll be Talmud, stage 4, Rabbi Goldberg. That'll be right here in the sanctuary. Halacha with me. That will be in the chapel. We'll be looking at a tshuva written from Rabbi Nevins on lab-grown meat. Very, very fascinating. And then there's Chassidut with Rabbi Avram Elner. That will be in Hirsch Hall. And there'll be another teen session, part bet, with Rabbi Adam on Jewish pride in the conference room. And then for those brave, which I hope most of you, if not all of you, are, at 11 o'clock or so, we can have more cheesecake and whatnot, and there'll be a late night session with Rabbi Elner and myself. Your story is my story, biblical figures and personal narrative. Now it's time for some cheesecake.
Before you go to cheesecake, just remember one thing. When you eat this dessert, do not go home on a full stomach. It will be a terrible night's sleep. So what you really need to do is have that cheesecake, then come and learn, allow the food to digest
So God is allowing, God is allowing creation. That part they have to refill the earth. God did succeed. What were his goals? Yeah, it is certainly. Fascinating thing to me is that's kind of what you were saying, but there's so much spirituality through that. Not, maybe you know this since you mentioned what is the story? God's destroyed humanity for making okay. So the Torah, even if you believe the Torah was somehow by that story, obviously revolutionized lesson. God is moral basis. If you think philosophy or things like that, also means no, but stealing doesn't have to. It also violence against you. It's a very rare word. So are you people who are in the Tower of Babel were the Babylonians? Yes. Here's Am Yisrael is supposed to live in this exile. Exile. Now, there are thinkers who offer the reason for roots was to spread the ideas and teachings of God. So that's fine. It's a possibility, but the Bible kind of takes the approach. And also, Joseph was willing to go into Egypt and his brothers maybe not want. So for 500 years, until Shivat Zion, the modern totally correct dialectic back and forth between the land. Do you believe in the diaspora? Right here in West Carolina.
Now it's those of you who are at home, right? We haven't started yet, so just hang in there. People are making their way, and I apologize for having to use this, but they're making me in terms of the camera and live streaming. Here's my question for you to start off. We're going to be talking about the life of Moses, in particular the sort of the earlier part of his life, as we talk about the sense of evolution and growth in the human being. So my question for you is, when you go to a funeral and you hear a good eulogy, like you've been to those, and you go like, oh my God, right? Like what a great eulogy. What makes a great eulogy in terms of an individual? Like the what? Go ahead. It's going to sound sick. Your ex-husband's funeral. So there's a hole in his soul that he tried filling with everything. Which, okay, so ultimately, what does it mean when you can understand about the individual better? Isn't that true? It's not just about the things that they did in their life, right, Mitch? Wouldn't you say that it's about, like, you walk away and go like, now I get them. Like, I understand more about their life. And so when I meet with families, and Rabbi Goldberg knows about this as well, is that when we talk about funerals, we're talking about helping families understand more about the individual and their life and what it meant, and maybe understand a little bit better why they are who they are because of the life that they lived. Right? That's when you walk away and you're like, ugh, right now. Yeah, go ahead, Roseanne. Look, I will tell you, one time I did a funeral where this is off topic a little bit, but the son, the father had abandoned him and his mother and just sort of moved away, started a whole new family. And his father ended up being very much respected in the community. Like ended up like doing great things in community and building and things like that. And he came up and said, look, my father was not a great father at all. But I'm glad to see that he actually was able to do something good with his life. They knew that. I mean, he didn't go through it, but people knew the story, right? But the point here is you don't always have to say the bad things, but by the way, you can understand someone better often through the difficult things that they went through. And so we're going to, here, Renee, if you would do me a favor and hand these out, okay? You can do that. I appreciate it. And these are, I'm not starting because I want to understand Moses earlier on. I want to understand his later life from his early life, but we're not going to look at his birth. We're not going to look at him being placed in the Nile. We're not going to look at him being found by the daughter of Pharaoh. We're not going to look at him being raised, although there's very little about it in the palace of Pharaoh. But I want you to now, and you know these sections, many of you. I want you to begin to think about Moses psychologically. Right? What is it that creates the man who he is and where he is in this journey point in his life? Does that make sense? So we're going to look at, I want you to look at him a little bit different. I'm going to read only so that people at home will be able to hear. So this is now Exodus 2, and you'll understand, I didn't want to read the whole section. You'll know this by context. When he went out the next day, he found 2 Hebrews fighting. Right? What happened the day before? Right? He killed the Egyptian who was beating on the Hebrew. Right? So he went out the next day, he found 2 Hebrews fighting. So he said to the offender, "Why do you strike your fellow?" He retorted, all right? Oh, by the way, he retorted, "Who made you chief and ruler over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses was frightened and thought, then the matter is known. So Moses was frightened. Why would he be frightened? Right? He grew up in the palace of Pharaoh. If anybody could get away with killing somebody or anybody they want. Hey, so what does that mean? Now, by the way, when it describes him going out, I didn't put this part in and I should have. Right? It says Moses went out amongst his people. The question is, did Moses know at that moment that the Israelites were his people or not? Did they know or not that he grew up like he was the son of Yocheved or not? Right. When we read the text, we tend to think the way it says it is that he went out amongst his country, his kinfolk, that he knew that they were his kinfolk, but it could be the narrator saying that he went out. Right? So it may not. But why was he afraid then? If he had no reason to be afraid, Mitch. I mean, this is like, right, he grew up. He's essentially the son of Pharaoh. But what does that mean? Is he going to be punished? Yeah, but is he going to be punished? The what? Yeah, but people are beaten and killed every moment there. Like, is he really going to be put to death? He's going to be punished for killing even an Egyptian? You're saying it's his conscience, okay? Well, does he know that he's an Israelite yet? By the way, that's a whole notion. But he was weaned until he was right, apparently. 4 years old, we say perhaps, right? 4 or 5, I think we talk about being weaning. So did he know? By the way, it's a big question. Did he know that he was an Israelite or not? But I want you to think about him now. How should we understand, and by the way, maybe feel a little bit sorry for Moses? Talk about, because when we talk about these first stages of change, they're going to be, here's what I want you to remember. Feelings of fear, thoughts are cautious, and behavior is paralyzed. Those are the 3 beginning, right? Let me repeat that again. Feelings of fear, thoughts are cautious, behavior is paralyzed. I didn't put that down here. Those are from my comments. I'll give you this afterwards. But how do we understand Moses in terms of his childhood and the impact it had on him? But imagine. So you're imagining, we have no proof of this. Do you think he felt abandoned? Conflicted about what? Conflicted about what? Is he an Israelite or is he an Egyptian? Okay. So he's abandoned. I have to imagine he must have wondered, like kids who are adopted, like, why did they give me up? Right? Why did they give me up? Why didn't my mother raise me? Now, it could have been like they said, oh, look, if we had kept you, you would have been killed, like all these, right? It could be. But I want you to imagine the impact he has and the way that his life is going to impact how he is going to make choices later and his own human evolution. So he's abandoned by his mother. We don't hear about his father, really, in the narrative here, do we? What? Right? Nothing memorable. Now, by the way, his adopted family, he has to run away from. So he essentially now is familyless. So he doesn't know who he is. He has to find himself. And that's going to be part of the journey that Moses is going to have to go on. So he runs away. You know this part of the story. He goes to Midian. And by the way, the prince then becomes a what? What's his vocation? He's a shepherd. The lowest. He goes from the greatest height to the lowest of what one would assume in terms of respect and viewing in society. The inverse of Joseph, right, who goes from being the shepherd up, but how do you think that he must have felt in that moment? You think he's questioning who he is? What life is about? He has nothing, right? He's an orphan, essentially. So he finds, right, a wife. And then there's this burning, so he finds another family. Now, by the way, later on this is going to play out. Does he lose this family? Does he get the other family? When we talk about him going to Pharaoh, what does that mean going to Pharaoh? All right, so we're going to get to that. So hold on to that, Renee. So now, this is at the burning bush. God says, I want you to go to Pharaoh, say, let my people go. And 5 times Moses is going to essentially refuse. Remember, one of the attributes is about cautiousness and about being paralyzed. And so why is it that Moses doesn't want to go? So we're going to look at some of these, and I want you to think about what is the real reason. Moses said to God, right, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt? Who am I? Mi anochi. Look at Rashi. Of what importance am I that I should speak with monarchs? Does he know who is Moses? Didn't he grow up with monarchs? He grew up in Pharaoh's palace. So does that really hold true? Who is he? Why do you think in here that Moses is saying, I don't want to do it, just from this one? Where he's going to say 5 times. 5 times he's going to say, don't send me, or I can't do it. Uh-huh. Every time he gets challenged to do something, it seems to go. Okay. So the lack of knowing who he is creates this additional conflict and this lack of confidence to almost be paralyzed. You are the ruler. But it says, okay, good. I'm glad you came back to that, Mitch. Because the question is, does he know who he is even? Is he an Israelite? Is he Egyptian? Is he a son of Pharaoh? Is he a lowly shepherd? We don't know that. We don't know. Yeah, we don't know that who knows what, but we just want to talk about from his condition. Because it doesn't matter what everybody else knows, it's what you believe or you're uncertain about. Right? It can be. We don't know that from the text at all. It's a fair reading, right? That everybody knew and that undermines it. So that's the first refusal. Let's go to the next one. Chapter 3, verse 13. Moses said to God, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your father's house has sent me to you, and they ask, what is God's name? What shall I say to them? So what is this about, this refusal? So they don't know. Does Moses know who this God is? They don't know anything about God yet. Moses doesn't know anything. In fact, if anything, here's another conflict. Who are his gods? In Egypt, he had the whole pantheon of gods. The Israelites didn't believe in those gods. And didn't know where their God was. And so could it be here, in terms of, again, being paralyzed, that he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know who his God is. And I don't know what to do. All right, let's go to the next one. Third refusal. But Moses spoke up and said, what if they do not believe me and do not listen to me, but say, Adonai did not appear to you? What's this one about? What's Moses afraid of here? Hold on. Why should they? Right, it's a great question. Why should they believe him? Okay, good. From Moses' standpoint, what is he afraid of, though? Rejection. Right? He's afraid of being rejected. He's been rejected before. Rejected by his mother, essentially. Now he's been rejected by Pharaoh. He had to leave. And the idea of that when you, in terms of encounter these obstacles in life, that you can become paralyzed. And are you going to be able to get out of it or not? And does that make sense in terms of being able to evolve? Right, feel for any questions, anything? We're going to get to a couple more here. Right, the fourth refusal, chapter 4, verse 10. Moses said to Adonai, please, O Lord, I have never been a man of words, either in times past now that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Right, kaved peh v'kaved lashon is the Hebrew. And Adonai said, who gives human speech? Who makes them dumb or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I? Now go, and I will be with you as you speak, and I will instruct you what to say. All right, so what's going on here? Huh? Does he have a stutter? Does he have... We have no idea what it means. So we'll talk a little bit about that. What is kaved peh, kaved lashon? Heavy. Now, it doesn't come easily. So what could this be about? Maybe he doesn't know what to say. An excuse to not speak. But he doesn't know. Go ahead. It could be, right? One is that it physically could be that he can't do it easily. And like a kid who gets picked on all the time, right? That he doesn't want to be put in that position. And by the way, the midrash is all there about how, the thought that he was going to take over from Pharaoh, that he was a usurper, and so they put before him the piece of coal and the gold crown, and which one would he take? And he's got, like any infant when he goes to reach for the crown, but the angel sort of took his hand, and I never figured out how he could actually pick it up and put it on his tongue. That part of the midrash I never understood, but he put it on his tongue and he burned it, and that's where he got the speech impediment from. Right? The rabbis are trying to figure out, like, what does that mean? To be of heavy tongue. And how can that be? Later on, there's a different expression. I think we're going to get to it. I think I included it here. Let's turn the page. This is Bachor Shor, a commentator. If I wanted, I could make you speak beautifully, but I do not want that. It will be to my greater glory if I can make someone of no speech and language fulfill my mission and my desire. He shall do a great thing through his own power. Okay, so this is an attempt to answer the question about why Moses, whether it's physical or emotional, right, that Bachor Shor is saying that if God had wanted, he could have given him perfect speech. But the point is imperfection. It could be more persuasive if you didn't have such eloquence, perhaps. And by the way, to overcome your fears and paralysis as well. I mean, your greatest fears in life, aren't they from the things that you are the most, right, afraid of? The Israelites can hear him. The question is going to be, who is Moses supposed to be speaking to, and why does he need Aaron? So I want you to hold on to that thought. All right, Mechilta, all right, Midrash. And Moses said, etc., Rabbi Elazar ben Arach said, the Holy One, blessed be he, implored Moses for 7 days to go on his mission, as is written, even yesterday, even the day before, 3 days ago, even 3 days before that, ever since you have spoken, and this is the seventh day. This is saying God actually 7 days was there with Moses trying to convince him. Okay? And Moses still wants to say no. Rashbam, I am not fluent in the Egyptian spoken by the upper classes. This is what you're talking about. The reason is I fled Egypt before I had completed my education. There in the meantime, I am 80 years of age. So, by the way, I don't know if you know this, Moses, there were 3 40-year cycles of his life. The first 40 years that he was in Egypt, second 40 years that he's out, the last 40 years that he comes back and then leads them basically like the 40 years of wandering. Interesting, like the cycles of his life, which, by the way, one of the best books I ever read early on was a book called Passages. You read that? It's a book on psychology about passages of life, 7 passages you go through in the 70s. He was the primary author and researcher in this, and it talks about you have passages throughout your life. From childhood to young adulthood. We know the biggest one about midlife, and they call it and when you don't successfully transition to it, we call it a midlife crisis. But you can have a crisis in any stage of your life. Why? Because at each stage transition, by the way, these are brought on by they're brought on either by significant events in your life, a death, a birth, some marker of life, some internal moment. It can be external, but things happen that push you in. And you can ask the question, you have to answer these questions successfully. Am I happy with my life? Would I be happy with my life to continue the way it is? And can I consider, right, the way that my life is going and that be happy with that? And if you can't answer those questions, you can't successfully pass from one passage to another. That's where midlife crisis happens. When you're not happy, we all know this. Men, women, and others who aren't happy with their life and had, whether it's divorce, whether it's doing something drastic, something different, because you're unhappy. Passages is part of this tradition of Moses. Can he get through these passages? All right? And so, Exodus now, the fifth refusal of Moses. But he said, please, O Lord, make someone else your agent. Mitch, after all God's pleading, 7 days he's there, gives every reason and every answer to him, and Moses still at the end says, send somebody else. Right? So, God gives in what way? So he says, so I'm going to give you your brother Aaron. So what's the role of Aaron in all this and Moses then? Not interpreter. On the one hand, emotional support. Aaron, according to one tradition, was coming along. Remember, what was his fear? That the Israelites wouldn't listen to him. Why should the Israelites listen to Moses if he is one of them, but he's not really not one of them? Now, what are the Israelites going to say? Who are you to come and tell us what to do? You lived in the house of Pharaoh. Are you kidding? Why should we listen to you? You have this image of a God out in the wilderness, but come on, you're crazy. So Aaron is supposed to be the one who speaks and the Israelites will listen to. Moses, having grown up in the house of Pharaoh, is the one that actually can speak to Pharaoh. Isn't that interesting to look at it? Each one was there for a different purpose. So understanding the purpose of Moses, isn't that an important part of his evolution? He understands that it's him, that he has to be able to get past this paralysis, but it doesn't happen easily. So how do we want to understand Moses? We're going to look at the next one. Chapter 6, verse 11 and 12. Go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, let the Israelites depart from the land. But Moses appealed to Adonai, saying, the Israelites would not listen to me. How then should Pharaoh heed me? Who gets tongue-tied? It's a very bad translation. Mitch, you have the Chumash open, right? I want you to go to chapter 6, verse 12 of Exodus. Chapter 6, verse 12, and go ahead, read it. Here it says impeded speech, but it's not kaved peh. The Hebrew is arel sfatayim. What does that mean, arel sfatayim? Uncircumcised lips. I got your attention now. Isn't that an interesting expression? Uncircumcised lips. In which they don't translate it in either one. Right? What was the one I gave you? But by the way, this is from Sepharia, the translation they have there. Me who gets tongue-tied. So what does that mean when you are uncircumcised of lips? By the way, the heart can also be uncircumcised in terms of the image of prophets. So what does that mean when you have... It's a covenant. Okay, good. The covenant... All right, so what does it mean? Is it impediment or he's not worthy? Not, you think of it being not Jewish. Not a true representative, but uncircumcised. So the more literal way of looking at it outside of the covenant is that, my mouth does not have, if you will, that ability, right? It is uncircumcised in that way, not perfect, if you will, right? It hasn't been fine-tuned and therefore it can't speak. But the other one from the covenant is that, right, my lips, I don't know how to talk this sacred talk. Right? I don't know. It's not who I am. So what do you think this says about Moses in terms of where he is as a human being? Lacking confidence. Good. He doesn't want to be. Just leave me alone. Leave me where I am. But he's in a place of fear. He's really afraid of what this mission is supposed to be about. He doesn't understand it. At best, ambivalent or doesn't understand it. He was supposed to be obligated, but he can't. Right? He just can't do it. Something is holding him back. Right? I want to look at one more, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about Moses, because I want you to think about the rest of his life. But Moses said to the people, "Have no fear. Stand by and witness the deliverance, which Adonai will work for you today." This is, by the way, at the Sea of Reeds. "Whom you will see today, you will never see again. And I will battle for you. You hold your peace." Then I said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward and lift up your rod, hold out your arm over the sea, split it so that the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground." What's the criticism that God has of Moses? Right. No, Nachshon ben Aminadav, according to Midrash. But I would rather believe it's a woman, absolutely. The idea of this fear that Moses is standing there, he knows what he's supposed to do, but he just can't do it. And so what does he do? Instead of him acting himself, he's appealing to God. So you said he did it again when he hits the rock. But what are the moments after this that help Moses? And I'm leaving the stage one, but I want you to see how it evolved. What are you think are the significant moments of growth for Moses during the wilderness? If you know the stories, give me a moment in which you think that Moses, this was a learning moment that helped Moses to grow. All right. So he wants to do everything. He wants to try and do everything. And his father-in-law, Yitro, says, "You can't do it all. Appoint judges." Right? He has to learn that he can believe in others as well. That's a huge moment of growth. Right? To know that it's not all on you. Good. Give me another one. Somebody else. So is there a moment, there's an incident that you can think of? Har Sinai. So what happens on Mount Sinai? God, right? The people are worshiping the golden calf. Anybody remember what God says to Moses? What does God say he's going to do with the people? He says, "I'm going to kill them all, and I'm going to start over with you." And Moses says, "Don't do that." He said, what's interesting, Moses says, he gives a number of reasons, but one of the reasons he gives, he says, is, what will the other nations think of you? Like, is that the model of who you are? Like, you just disagree with people, then you just kill them? And then he says, you brought them all the way out here just to kill them? He gives a lot of different reasons. So good. So Mount Sinai. Another moment in which Moses had to have, which was a growth moment. Because I want to offer here that our greatest moments of growth come from moments of conflict and challenge. Do you believe that? Do you believe that? Our greatest moments of growth come in the most difficult moments that we have. The what, sorry? The plagues. No, it's okay. It's hard to hear for me to hear. You know, it's interesting. The plagues were so passive. Moses, he follows God's command. He does all the things that God tells him, but it's kind of safe. God told him to do something, and so he did it. The highest level, of one's growth and development isn't when somebody tells you to do something that you do it. It's when you know what to do. And you have to do it. He's not what, sorry? So later on, so that's going to be the ultimate kind of test of him. How is he going to respond to not being able to go into the land? But what's interesting is Moses, by the end, the very beginning we said he's kaved peh. He says, I can't go because I can't talk. And yet the book of Deuteronomy is Moses talking forever. Right? From the guy who didn't want to go to Pharaoh, think about it, the whole book is him sharing with the Israelites exactly what took place. He's a talker nonstop. The question is, how do you get from the Moses that we're talking about here, right, to the Moses 40 years later, in which he is all of a sudden now a different human being? That's part of the human growth and evolution that we're talking about tonight. How do you grow? Any other examples that you have? We just have a couple minutes left in terms of incidents that Moses confronted in the wilderness. Yeah. When they challenged him and challenged his leadership, that's a moment of whether you cave or not. Now, luckily, look, he did have God on his side. That's a good thing to have. So when you have a conflict with Korach, God can just open up the earth and go like, okay, problem solved. But the idea that and that you have faith in your mission is so important. Go ahead. Moses needed Korach. He needed the event. And what I want to suggest is, if you read the Torah now, so the question is, why does the Torah include these events? And I like, by the way, and Gary Shapiro is a great teacher. My own take on that beginning of Genesis part is that God had no idea about human beings. Right? It's like us. We all believe we can control everything, and God's learning human beings. Like, I don't have a chance. Like, they are, right? They are just imperfect. You have no idea what they're going to do. You made it. It's like if you have kids, right? Deborah's looking at me like, you'd love the kids to do exactly as you want to. Do they ever do exactly as you want to? Oh, you have good girls. All right, you've got good girls. But in general, right, they're unpredictable. God works best in the realm of perfection. God works best with angels and in the world of perfection, and doesn't work so well with human beings in terms of understanding them. And that's how, so you and I share the same, that this is about God learning that human beings, you give them free will, and boy, are you in trouble. And you're just not going to be able to know. But with that free will comes evolution, comes change, the ability to learn from our experiences, and that's exactly what's going to be happening. Fear of AI is a whole nother story. But I want you to, my hope was that tonight to see this as, if you will, almost like a eulogy for Moses. To understand what are the events in his life early on and through it that made him the person he was, the imperfect human that he was, and to understand that that is what it is to be the human being, imperfection. And that in that evolution, the best you can hope for is to become self-fulfilled and self-actuated and to overcome all those things in life that life gives you. I did a funeral. I've had two different, actually I'm thinking about it for Yisker's sermon this year, about two funerals I did within like a month of each other. One was for a 104-year-old, and then last week was for an 11-year-old. Right. And the 104-year-old, her message was, and it was beautiful always, don't fight what life gives you. Don't fight what life gives you. Learn how to pivot. Right? It was this idea that you can't fight those forces. You have to accept what life gives you to the sense of being able to make the best out of it. And so that's going to be with Moses. It's going to be with human beings to become the best possible version of ourselves that we can. And that is the evolution. Anyway, I think my time is up, or it should be. What time is it supposed to be? 20 after? Oh, is that? Oh, I didn't see him over there. Good, I was distracted. So we're done. Now, you know where the next session. Ron Goldberg is teaching in here. What are you teaching? Changes. Okay. Okay. All right. Rabbi Mendelson is in the chapel. And do you know what he's teaching? He is teaching halakha. Hasidut. All right? So, right, Avram, Rabbinic, Avram, yeah, will be there. You're teaching Hasidut? All right, and you're in Hirsch Hall? All right, if you want to go there, if you want to be with Rabbi Mendelson, if you'd like to stay with Rabbi Goldberg, you'll stay in here. I always love when I know each other a long time. Many more. Absolutely.
Hi, Hi, everybody who's watching at home or watching on live streaming. We're going to get started in here in about 2 minutes. The way this is shaping up, we're running a little bit out of schedule, but that shouldn't be shocking to anybody. Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Rabbi Ron Goldberg. I have the honor of being both a past president here at Hamakom and also being an oral rabbi, so it's a little bit unusual. We're talking about changes, and I think changes for me are fascinating. And what kind of colors my worldview when it comes to changes is I worked for several years at Beit Shuvah. Beit Shuvah is the Jewish faith-based addiction recovery center here in Los Angeles, and I colored an awful lot of my ideas about like what does changes mean. So here's my first question for the group: when do people change? When do people change? I'm hoping somebody will answer that, but when do people change? Okay, now theory number one, when they need to. Theory number two, of course, is people don't change, they are who they are. And my theory kind of goes like this: people change when the cost of doing what they're doing is more than they want to pay. So let's follow this out for a little bit. Working with addiction recovery. I promise you, every single abuser of heroin I worked with, every single one of them knew that heroin was bad. Anybody here think heroin is good? Of course not. Everybody knows it's bad. Every single addict knows if they shoot in 1/2 drop too much, there's a good chance they're not going to wake up the next morning. They are very aware of this. My other theory becomes that deterrence or consequence is not necessarily a deterrent. Consequence is not a deterrent. But when the cost of doing what you're doing is more than you want to pay, people change. So, classic example, New Year's Eve. What do we do on New Year's? You make resolutions, that's right. What's the most common resolution Americans make? Yeah, that's the one, lose weight. Okay, all of the above. Exercise more, lose weight. Mine is I'm going to spend more hours each month studying Hebrew. I want to become more proficient in it. And how many of us keep those resolutions? Oh, for how long is a good point. And when it comes to diet and exercise, I can tell you just by the attendance at most gyms, first week of January, attendance, Valentine's Day is the cutoff point. Most of those resolutions cut off there. So changes. People change when the cost of doing what they're doing is more than they want to pay. When the person figures that being a certain way is impeding their life in a way they don't want to deal with anymore, that's when they begin to change. So let's talk about how Judaism looks at changes. And my particular part of that 6-step program that Rabbi Mendelsohn was talking about earlier, it was about that first moment of positivity, like, oh, this is working. Here's a very Jewish thing, and it's funny, Rabbi Vogel just used this quote in his teachings. We're going to read tomorrow my favorite quote in Torah. It's Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. The phrase is, Kol ha'am ro'im et hakolot. Anybody proficient in Hebrew here? Okay, Kol ha'am ro'im et hakolot. What does that mean? Kol ha'am ro'im et hakolot. Nope, that's it. All the people saw the voices. What's wrong with that? You don't see voices, but that's literally what the Torah says. My second most favorite quote, that's a discussion for another class. My most favorite quote in Torah is the third one down, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. And Hashem said to Moses, why are you yelling at me? Speak to the people and get them moving. So the motif that this comes up in The people have left Egypt. They're at the Red Sea. The sea is in front of them. The Egyptians are closing in behind them. And what is Moses doing? He's standing on like a little knoll, and he's praying, God, 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 save us, God, 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 save us, save us, save us, God. And God, in so many words, says, why are you yelling at me? Get the people moving. What do we take from this? We take from this a very Judaic thought. Judaism is a participation religion, that mankind is in partnership with God. I was probably the worst Talmud student at the Yeshiva Masorti in Jerusalem. And people were saying to me, why don't you try like praying the night before a test? And my observation was, I find that prayer works best if I actually open up the book and study. And that's the same idea here. God was going to help, but the people had a part to play. The people had a part to play in this whole transaction. When I do interfaith work and I talk to Christian clergy, they'll come up with something like, they'll say, what do you guys do when you're in trouble? And I'll say, well, we pray, and then we go have to do something. I'd like to lose weight. Therefore, if I don't have that third piece of cheesecake and if I don't have that second Coke, that'll be helpful. My Christian colleagues will say, oh, I turn my problems over to Jesus. Is that Jewish theology? No, our theology is you have a part to play. We have a part to play. So if we're going to make a positive change, we very much have a part to play in it. We're optimists. Anybody ever go to a museum of the Shoah and see some of the artwork that comes out of the Shoah? What do you notice about it? Yes, and let's expand on that a little bit, Renee. Not only is it something colorful, it's not typically like gray tones, it's something of color, it's something of optimism. There's this idea that tomorrow is going to be a better day. So we say during Hallel, Zeh hayom asa Adonai nagi elav v'nismach bo. This is the day that God made. Let's rejoice and be happy in it. That every day is a new opportunity. Every day we see a chance that we can have a better day than we had the day before. That every day is that new opportunity. If you don't see it that way, why get up in the morning? If you don't see each day as a new opportunity, how can you make forward progress? So when somebody wants to change, somebody wants to make a forward progress, make a definite change in their life, they have to wake up and know that, number one, they have to play an active part in it. Number two, that each day is a new opportunity. Who makes us do things? And the answer is we make us do things. We were talking about free will in the last class with Rabbi Vogel. Free will is a great thing. We in Judaism accept the idea that we make our choices. And we're looking around the room here, I think we're all of almost a certain age to remember an American comedian. I was blanked on his name. It's not Soupy Sales. Geraldine was the character he used to play. Flip Wilson. What was Flip Wilson's big punchline? The devil made me do it. You never hear that in Judaism. You made you do it. I made me do it. But the devil, we don't delegate blame. We have that idea of personal responsibility, and that helps us get through it. We have this idea, the second one from the bottom. Don't worry about tomorrow's troubles because you don't know what the day will bring. Okay. Besides me, who's ever gotten so worried about tomorrow they didn't get a chance to enjoy today? I was so worried about the traffic going to the airport, I forgot to enjoy the flight, enjoy the adventure of going someplace. I was so worried about making sure I got on the right Uber. I was at the right gate. We get lost in our thoughts. Judaism doesn't believe in this idea of everything being preordained. We believe that change is possible. We believe that even the person who Even the person who may seem to be like the most lost in sin, that there's nothing redeemable about them, that they can change, okay, that they can repent. And our sages have pondered the question of which is better, the idea of always being on the straight and narrow or the person who's repenting. So an example I'll give you, when I worked at Beit Shuvah, I had a young woman on my caseload. She was intelligent, she was tall, even by California standards, she was exceptionally good looking, but she was convinced that she was irredeemable, that she had left so much wreckage in her wake with her family, with school, with her employers, with her relatives, and that, in her words, I will never be clean again. I'll never feel pure and clean again. And I thought about it, and luckily on one of the stained glass windows at Beit Shuvah is my favorite quote in Talmud. In the place where the truly repentant stand, the saints can't reach. I had her read that to me, and I said, listen, when you and I stand here together, it's not my light of holiness that's illuminating us, it's your light of repentance that is. We like the idea that somebody can change. We like the idea that somebody can find it within themselves to change course. Anybody ever had that moment where you said, I have to stop doing what I'm doing, I have to find it within myself to change course? How hard is that? And what keeps us from doing it? Okay, so we always look for that path of least resistance. Okay, it's easier sometimes to say, no, I'll keep doing what I'm doing. It's the path that I know. The problem with that is if we don't do that, we don't change, and we don't progress. One of my big takeaways from working in rehab is I statements, not you statements. In 2008, I was working in the mortgage industry. What happened in the mortgage industry in 2008? Anybody remember? Absolute collapse. That was me all by myself causing that. No, kidding. And I was I was working, but my income went from, let's say, $100 a year to virtually zero. And my wife, who's much smarter than me, said, I can deal with supporting us, but there's got to be a plan. I didn't really want to change. I mean, I wasn't happy, but doing nothing was the easier course. But changing and saying, okay, everything I want to do means I have to go back to school. If I'm going back to school, what is it I really, really, really want to do? 5 years later, I came out of rabbinic school. Okay, we change when the cost of doing what we're doing is more than we wanted to pay. Staying doing nothing, staying in an industry that had totally imploded, staying with no income, staying with no prospects in there was easy. But convincing myself that there had to be a better path and taking that first step, that was the hard part. How do we take that first step? What motivates us to take that first step? When we realize what we're doing isn't succeeding. Anybody else have a moment like that? It's very true. So Renee was sharing the piece of art, the inspirational artwork that all of us have. The way we've always done it is no longer an acceptable. This is the way we've always done it is no longer an acceptable answer. In the workplace, how many times have we run into that roadblock of we've always done it this way? All right, the way we did it in 1975 and 1985 and 1995 might have been valid in those years, but it's 2024. If we don't change, what's going to happen to us? Yeah, that's true. You become, as Renee says, you become part of history. You fail because you haven't moved with the times. And it's fascinating, the world we live in, the times move faster and faster. We had this imagery of study. Everybody responded, study is greater, for the study causes one to act. This idea of the more that we learn, the more that we know should be motivating. Anybody ever had a teacher that motivated you to do something beyond what you thought you were capable of? Who? Okay, I have no idea who that is, but oh, that was his first name? Renee and I both went to Taft back a million years ago, and we had apparently the same history teacher a year apart, but I didn't know his first name. Wow. He was a motivational teacher. He motivated us because he made us do things we didn't want to do, and yet somehow we did them. Okay? By learning, by studying, we find a new way to go forward, a new way to act, a new way to find success. What's that old example? What's the working definition of insanity? Well, let's flesh that out. Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a new result, expecting a different result. Does that work? And we know. I want to succeed in my studies, but I don't want to study. That's not going to work. Doing it the way I've always done it is not going to work. It's not going to lead to success. So finding out within ourselves to make that change, to discover that study will lead me to a better place. Learning to do things in a new way is a better way. My wife and I are both in marriage number 2. My first marriage, the kitchen was an absolute balagan. Balagan is a Hebrew word meaning basically large mess. Judy is a person of order, of seder. Everything has a place, and everything belongs in its place. And it took me a while to internalize that this was the better way to do things. When we change, when we begin to have that success, we begin to see there's a better way. One of the other challenges, and we were talking about this 4th step of seeing the first fruits of your labors. What motivates us to continue on a path of change? What do they do at Weight Watchers every week? You weigh in at Weight Watchers every week. What's the goal there? Yeah, reinforcement. Hey, Denise lost a half a pound. Now, for all we know, she's just not wearing the same blouse that she wore last week. She's not wearing the same heavy sweater. But that idea of making positive progress gives us that victory to build on. Okay? We recognize that when we want to make a change, we want to see the tangible results. Anybody here ever saw like a fitness program or a running program or a weightlifting program? You need that tangible result. Oh, last week I walked half a mile. 2 weeks later, I can walk 3/4 of a mile. Does that encourage us to keep moving on that path? Of course it does. But we need that positive reinforcement. We need that positive sense. Okay, this program is actually working out. The last source I wanted to share on the very bottom of the page. And it's one of the sources I'd heard about it, but I couldn't really find an accurate basis for it. The imagery is from the Midrash that Rabbi Shimon said, every single blade of grass has a corresponding mazal. Now, mazal literally means like a constellation in the heavens. It doesn't mean luck. In the sky, that which hits it and tells it to grow. The other imagery, the way I've seen this quote is every blade of grass has an angel above it saying, grow, grow, grow. What do we need? What the imagery they're trying to give us here is that positive imagery that you can do this, you will do this, you can succeed. So I know that we joke a lot about in Judaism about I call it positive pessimism. Oh, I'm sure it's not going to work out, the type of thing. But actually, Judaism is very much the opposite, that we believe that a positive attitude makes all the world. We approach the world in a positive way. Even in our darkest moments, we have these positive imageries. Thoughts? I'm pleased I was this complete. Mm-hmm. Oh. Oh, I think very much the question was when they use this phrase of repentant, is it somebody who suddenly turned to God, or is it somebody who was a total sinner and then found the path? I believe it's that total sinner. We have the example of the sage Reish Lakish, who was before he became a Torah scholar, his occupation was highwayman. He was a robber. And I think this, I go back to the example I had of the young lady who was sure she'd never be clean again. I really believe with all my heart that we look at that person who may appear to be unredeemable, who can't see a way out of their life, that we see that as such a marvelous, almost miraculous turnaround. And I think they physically meant, even in the Talmudic times, that they were looking at the person who was lost in sin. I think that's the person they were looking at. I think they're also recognizing that, like the guy who's always walked that straight and narrow path. One is a little bit strange. You know, that hits me as odd. The person who's never deviated from the path, the person who's never been tempted, the person's never sinned. The guy who says, "Oh, I never inhaled." Really? Never? That's puzzling to me. But I think our sages recognize that person who had been transgressing, who had made take an easy one. Somebody who decides, I'm not eating milk and meat anymore. I'm gonna stop having cheeseburgers. I think they see a value in that you're giving something up to go to a higher level. So I think they very much saw it as a physical thing more than anything else. I think they recognized in our humanity, we make mistakes, that we don't always succeed, that we change because we need to, but we're afraid to. And what helps us, and I think they saw the world, the rabbis, for a bunch of guys living in Roman times, are actually very good observers, very keen observers of the human condition and the world around them. I think they saw this need in our human state, that to make a positive change is not that easy. What is it we say nowadays? The easiest thing to break is a good habit. They saw the need for that reinforcement and to recognize the person who was struggling so hard to make that change. Excuse me? Oh. Okay, so Renee is saying the first part of learning is failing. Actually, I think we talked a little bit about it in Rabbi Vogel's class, sure. There's a certain benefit to a B-. There's a certain benefit to not succeeding. The challenge to us then is, what do you do with that failure? I had I was teasing Rabbi Mendelson. He was talking, and Gary, about their love of biblical Hebrew grammar. I struggled with Hebrew grammar all through rabbinic school. My very, very first test in grammar class, out of 200 possible points, I got 57. And I said to the teacher, what could I do differently? And her response to me was very Israeli. She said, you could study. And I think that's sometimes we have to say, what do we do when we fail? When we miss the mark, what do we do to pick ourselves up? It's not so much that was a fail, it's where do you go forward from that? Do you accept that and say, okay, you know what, I don't get this, I'm never going to get it? Or do I say, you know what, I've got to try something different? So yeah, I totally agree with you that first step in learning is learning to fail. and then learning that going forward from there is perfectly fine. Anybody here do sales work? Anybody in sales? If you're, you know, those phone calls we get, you know, wanting to sell us either like a warranty on our car or something like that, or insurance, they're going on the theory of 98 people out of every 100 are going to say no thanks. But finding those two is what they're constantly looking for, always trying to know that you're going to fail 98 times, but you're going to succeed 2. And that's what keeps them going. It's learning to live with that fail. Other thoughts? Oh, so let me paraphrase, make sure I got the question correctly. Do people also change for the worse? Mm-hmm. Let me think about that. Excuse me? No, well, let's follow that all the way out now. Okay, so somebody is having trouble dealing with life. Okay, so let's put this into the world I know of drug addiction. Drug addiction is just self-medication. You're self-medicating through a problem that you have. That's the change that you're making. Okay, the problem with that is you've substituted one problem for probably a worse one, and that's another thing the cost of doing what they're doing was more than they wanted to pay, so they're making a change. And instead of making a good change, they've decided to self-medicate to Band-Aid over whatever it was, whatever the issue was. The problem is they haven't solved anything. And that eventually is going to catch up with them again. And they're going to be faced with the exact same choice of, okay, I still have my original problem. I'm now abusing my psyche and my body. I don't want to continue. And I'm back to square 1.5. So yeah, I think it can work that way, but I think it also, though, you know, we talk about free will. You know, what do we do with that choice? I know that I have to change. I know I have to do something differently. How do I approach that? Okay, do I make a good choice within it? I think the challenge for all of us is sometimes we don't know what the next good choice is. We take the information we have and we make the best choice we have with the data that we have. I promise you, every person who is drinking or self-medicating with narcotics knows what they're doing is a fail. They know that that's not going to last. But at some point, they have to get to that bottom where they can come out of that again. Dealing with human beings is a challenging thing. You know, that free will thing. You know, we make all kinds of weird choices. Haven't we been around a friend who's in a relationship and you're going like, him, her, what's the matter with you? But that person's not seeing it the same way. Yeah. The challenge of being human. I hadn't really thought of it. Thank you. I hadn't thought of it that way. You know, can you choose that choice propel you to the wrong choice? But as you say, for appearances, and after a while, all of us discover that changing just for appearance's sake is never lasting. It's never positive. You know, sooner or later, we still have to, as we say, face the music that got us to this point in the first place. When one starts to change for the positive, I think the first thing we need is that positive reinforcement. from the people around us and from within ourselves. I always say that we're our own worst critics. Nobody would criticize me more than I criticize myself. But by the same token, I don't always see the positive that somebody else will see. You did a really great job with that. Yeah, it's all right. You know, but we don't always give ourselves the full credit for the jobs that we've done. Other thoughts? Otherwise, we're going to wrap up and enjoy some more cheesecake. All right, thanks everybody.